Hey, what's going on, guys? This Saturday is UFC 295, Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira for the vacant light heavyweight title. And this is a very good fight card, but as you guys know, I always have to pick it apart. This is going to be my top 3 reasons I hate UFC 295. I'm going to start with some honorable mentions, then I'm going to get into my actual list, going from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most hate UFC 295. And I think a lot of you who follow the channel on a regular basis is going to be shocked at the number 1 reason. So starting off with the first honorable mention, and that is that Jiri Prochazka or Alex Pereira has to get KO'd at UFC 295. I know sometimes main events don't end up how you think they will be, a la Jailton Almeida versus Derek Lewis. But I don't feel like there's a way the main event ends and somebody doesn't get brutally KO'd, and that's going to alter the trajectory of their entire career. For Alex Pereira, who I'm actually picking against, he's already in his late 30s. He's already been KO'd in the sport before. He just moved up the division. If he gets flatlined by Jiri Prochazka, who knows where he goes from there? And I don't like a lot of the matchups for him at light heavyweight. And for Jiri, you have Jiri returning from a year and a half off. You know, he had a nasty shoulder injury. He had to have surgery on. He hasn't fought in forever. And then if he goes out there and gets chinned against Alex Pereira, and Jiri fights so recklessly, I feel like one of these days he's going to get brutally chinned and then he's never going to be the same again. So I'm just really disappointed. I know all fights have to end, but I just feel like in this main event, someone's definitely getting KO'd. Whether it's Pereira or whether it's Prochazka, somebody is definitely getting KO'd. And I just hate to see either Jiri Prochazka or Alex Pereira get KO'd at UFC 295. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention. And this almost actually made the list. And that is that Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern is on the main card. It's the featured fight on the main card. Why? I've been saying this for a year. Jessica Andrade is only showing up for paychecks. She's not the fighter she once was. And she even confirmed it recently, talking about her divorce and paying out money for her divorce. She's literally showing up for a paycheck time in and time out. She's not there to actually win. She's on a 3-fight losing streak. She's gotten stopped in all 3 of those fights. She does not care to show up to win anymore. She's just showing up to lose. And Mackenzie Dern, you know, she has submission ability. In 2 out of the last 3 fights, Jessica Andrade has gotten submitted. So it's just a setup fight for Mackenzie Dern to kind of climb the ladder of strawweight without actually having to climb the ladder. At one point in time, it's crazy that I'm saying this. I can't even believe I'm saying this. At one point in time, Jessica Andrade was a solid win for a fighter. Now it's like, okay, does this even mean anything? Like, I don't even know how good Mackenzie Dern is, even if she chokes out Jessica Andrade in the first round, because that's how lowly I think of Jessica Andrade now. I don't think she's taking it seriously. I don't think she cares anymore, and I think she's just showing up for a paycheck each and every time out. Tatiana Suarez, she gets submitted easily by her. Yan Xiaonan, she gets finished in the first round, TKO by her. Fight before that gets submitted by Erin Blanchfield. Now, I know this is good competition, but it just seems like in every single one of these fights, Jessica Andrade is just not there. And to top it all off, we already know this fight isn't the greatest matchup, and it isn't the greatest fight just because Jessica Andrade doesn't really show up. We put it on the main card, and it's not even opening the main card. It's got to be the featured fight on the main card, which for those of you who don't know, somebody commented, I talked about featured fight on a card. Somebody commented saying they never heard that term. They say that every single UFC pay-per-view, they say that term. It's the 3rd fight on the card. It's the fight before the co-main event. That is the featured fight on the card. It just makes no sense because honestly, Pat Sabatini, Diego Lopez, Matt Frevola, Benoit Saint Denis could easily be above Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern. And it's just the fact that this is, I hate when we have all these great fights, like both those fights I just mentioned. Then you have Sergei Pavlovich, Tom Aspinall. Then you have the main event, Prochazka versus Pereira. It just sucks when you're having really good fights. And then in between there, you get a fight by Jessica Andrade where, oh, I'm just here to collect my paycheck and go home. That's all I'm here to do. So I hate that this is on the main card. And I really hate this fight in its entirety. I wish it was on the prelims. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with number 3. And that is that Tom Aspinall is showing up to UFC 295 on short notice. And I absolutely hate the UFC for this. Because the UFC had Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic booked. They had Sergei Pavlovich as a backup. There was talk of Pavlovich versus Aspinall on the card originally. But the UFC said, no, we don't want to actually schedule the backup for a fight. They kind of shied away from that in the past. And now they knew that Jones or Stipe wasn't going to take the Pavlovich fight anyway. And instead now Aspinall is set up where he has to take on a monster like Sergei Pavlovich on short notice for the interim heavyweight title fight. it's just, I hate these fights that are on short notice. I talked about it with UFC 294. Hamzat Chimaev, Kamaru Usman, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. I hate these fights that are made up on short notice, that are massive fights for their career, because no matter what happens, there's an asterisk next to it. If Sergei Pavlovich goes out there and starches Tom Aspinall, it's on short notice. Sergei Pavlovich was training to step in and fight Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic. He's prepared. And even so, he was preparing for those two guys. So he's taking Tom Aspinall, which is a totally different stylistic matchup. It's not as bad for Pavlovich, but still, it's on short notice for him. You know, if he loses, he's like, oh, well, I was thinking I was going to fight Stipe, or, you know what I mean? There's always a million different excuses. And for Aspinall, you know, you're going to have Bisping. I can only imagine the excuses that Bisping is going to trot out if Aspinall gets starched in the first round. I mean, Bisping is going to be making up a litany of excuses, short notice, this and that. And it just delegitimizes the fight a little bit. And that's what I hate about it, because it's like, I don't even know if Pavlovich wins, is it really that great of a win? Because considering Aspinall only had 2 weeks to train for it, was he already in training camp? He said he wasn't. So I just feel like short notice fights, especially fights of this magnitude, I absolutely despise when they are on short notice. I love this fight. I love Sergei Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. I think it's an amazing fight. I think it's for the real title, considering Jones doesn't want to fight any contenders. He won't even fight the winner of this fight. So I think this is a really good heavyweight fight. I just wish both guys had adequate time to prepare for each other. Coming in on 2 weeks' notice to take on a guy who's on like a 6-fight winning streak, all wins by first round KO, that's a tough task, especially when your last fight, your last win in the last 2 years was against Marcin Tybura. You know, it's a tough ask for Tom Aspinall. And I feel like no matter what happens on Saturday, it's going to be like, well, Tom Aspinall came in on short notice. If he does lose, it's going to be the storyline after that. I'm even going to be talking about, oh, well, Tom Aspinall took it on 2 weeks' notice. Imagine taking on a monster like Sergei Pavlovich on 2 weeks' notice. It's horrible circumstances for him for the biggest fight of his life, coming off a win over Marcin Tybura, basically a tune-up fight. So I just hate that Tom Aspinall is coming in on short notice. Moving on to my number 2 reason I hate UFC 295. And I debated about putting this on the list or not, because I understand how it can be perceived and it's not really all that bad. But that is that the main event of UFC 295 should be Jiri Prochazka versus Jamal Hill. That was the true fight to make. And Jamal Hill coming off beating the brakes off of Glover Teixeira, he won the belt. Jiri Prochazka had just vacated the belt prior to that because of injury. And that was the fight we were anticipating since January. Since January of 2023, we've been waiting. When's Jiri Prochazka going to return? We're going to see Jamal Hill defending his belt against Jiri Prochazka, the champion that never lost his belt. That was the fight that I wanted to see. And I understand that Jiri Prochazka and Alex Pereira is an excellent fight. But for me personally, to look at what they've recently achieved, Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka is a better fight. It's just a better fight. I mean, Alex Pereira is coming off a fight where he barely beat Jan Blachowicz. In my opinion, he actually lost that fight. So he's coming off that, fight that was just lackluster regardless. Even if you thought he won, it was a lackluster performance. Versus imagine Jamal Hill coming off that beatdown of Glover Teixeira. You have Jiri Prochazka. His last fight was fighting Glover Teixeira, so they would have had that in common. And it was just a fight. I mean, think about it. Since January, we've been anticipating that. So from January to whenever it was announced that Jamal Hill tore his Achilles, we were thinking this is the next light heavyweight title fight. And what a matchup that would have been, because Jamal Hill, it's not like he has this massive hole in his grappling like Alex Pereira does. So I just feel like you would, in a way, you're having a champion versus champion fight. I know a lot of people like Alex Pereira. I know some people are going to be down in the comments saying, oh, you just hate on Alex Pereira. No, in my opinion, I want the most compelling fights. And for me, Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka was the most compelling fight that could be made for the light heavyweight title. And it was a fight that I was looking forward to and anticipating and thinking about, oh, who am I going to pick in this fight for the last 6, 7, 8 months? So it's just unfortunate that we wait that long and then we never get the fight. It's almost like, in a way, this is kind of a weird comparison, but if you've been a fan for a long time, Dominic Cruz versus Renan Barão. Renan Barão was an interim champion, then elevated to the undisputed champion for like 3 years. I don't remember the exact, timeline, but because that was like 10 years ago. And we were always anticipating Renan Barão, Dominic Cruz, Renan Barão, Dominic Cruz. It never came to fruition. Renan Barão then loses to TJ Dillashaw. We never got to see that fight. And that was a fight we were looking forward to for like 2 years. And it never happened. So I just hate that we may never get Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka. Depending on how their careers go, who knows, Jiri gets flatlined, Jamal Hill gets the next title shot. We may never see that fight. So I'm disappointed that we're not getting Jamal Hill versus Jiri Prochazka. Moving on to my number one reason I hate UFC 295. And I think this is going to shock a lot of people. And they're going to be like, wait a second, Joey, I'm very confused here. But my number one reason I hate UFC 295 is that Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic got canceled. And you're probably thinking, Joey, you were rooting for that fight to get canceled. You didn't want to see that heavyweight title fight. Yeah, you're right. I was rooting for it to end. I was rooting for it to not happen. I was rooting for one of the guys to pull out. But I didn't anticipate that one of those guys would pull out of the main event. They would sit out for 8 months, and then they would still rebook that fight. So the heavyweight division is stuck in neutral no matter what happens, because Jon Jones is now going to be out till summer of 2024, and the only opponent he's willing to take when he returns is Stipe Miocic. I would rather it just happen in November. It's just like when I talk about undeserved title shots. If they're going to happen on a quick turnaround, at least I can stomach that, because now we're not holding up the division for 6 months for a title fight that should never happen. We are literally looking at a time period where we're looking at a year and a half waiting for Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And I know people are going to be like, what are you talking about? It was just in November. It's going to happen maybe next spring or summer. No, we're waiting from March of 2023 to potentially June or July of 2024 for Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And Stipe doesn't even deserve a title shot. We're holding up the heavyweight division for literally nothing. I hope, and I'm hoping and praying, this would change my mind completely, I hope that Jon Jones fights the winner of Sergei Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall, because if not, what is that champion doing for a while? Because the UFC is going to ice them. They're going to say, we're going to need you to sit out and wait to see what happens with Jones Stipe. So let's see Sergei goes out there and just starches Tom Aspinall. We're going to have to wait. Let's say Jon Jones Stipe doesn't happen till the summer, and then they're willing to fight that person. We're going to have to wait a full year to see the winner of Pavlovich versus Aspinall fight and defend their title or unify their belts. Now, let's say Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, whoever wins that fight, let's say they retire afterwards. Well, now we've waited, 8 months, 9 months for the champion who's now elevated to the undisputed champion in Pavlovich or Aspinall to defend their belt because they were too busy waiting for a fight that never came to fruition. So I just hate that Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic didn't happen at UFC 295. I wish it would have just happened so we could move on with the heavyweight division. I'm tired of this waiting game. Stipe Miocic has sat out for, by the time he fights Jon Jones next year, it'll be damn near 4 years. That is craziness. That is egregious. That is disgusting. Why are we doing this? This is becoming WWE. And honestly, and I've talked about this in previous videos, I think it's tarnishing Jon Jones' legacy. And I know people are going to disagree with that, but the fact you're only willing to fight Stipe, and maybe it's the UFC, but I doubt it. I doubt it. I think Jones says, I'm looking at Pavlovich, I'm looking at Aspinall, I'm looking at Stipe. Okay, Stipe has the most name value. He's the easiest opponent as well, so I'll take him on. I just hate that the heavyweight division is now going to be stuck in neutral for the next 8, 9, 10 months, all because Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic couldn't just happen in November, which was originally talked about to happen in July of 2023. So we waited 8 months for it not to happen. And one thing I want to say, I saw an article recently. I want to criticize Jon Anik. Jon Anik said, yeah, I wasn't surprised. Jon Jones trying a quick turnaround. I wasn't surprised that he got injured. A quick turnaround is March to November. What is Jon Anik smoking? What is he smoking? He said, yeah, I wasn't surprised Jon Jones got injured because, it was such a quick turnaround. That makes absolutely no sense. It was a long turnaround. What's March to November? What is that? You have basically 8 months. 8-month turnaround is a quick turnaround. And then he gets injured. Now we got to wait another 8 months. We're waiting a year and a half for a title fight that it should have never been put together to begin with. So even though I was wishing on it, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. And that's what happened in this fight, because now we're waiting until 2024 to see Grandpa Stipe Miocic get a title shot after answering the phones at the fire department for 3.5 years. So let me know what you guys think about all my reasons down in the comment. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.